What would you do if your planet was suddenly put on cosmic lockdown by an alien armada so huge it literally blocked out the stars? And what if you found out they were here to bully you into joining their empire or get wiped off the map? If you think you'd fight back, hit that subscribe button because you're going to love how this plays out. We're talking 300 warships, the personal "we're here to ruin your day" fleet from something called the Galactic Hegemony Council. Every single ship was bigger than a city, designed not just for war, but to make you surrender before a single laser was even fired. From the bridge of his flagship, Grand Admiral Zixth watched Earth, his 4 eyes gleaming. This was the first move in a 50,000-year-old playbook that had never, ever failed. Step 1, show up with a fleet that screams, "You've already lost." Step 2, play a highlight reel of all the planets you've already turned to space dust. Step 3, wait for the new guys to have a complete and total meltdown. The hegemony ships weren't just made of metal, their hulls were decorated with the actual bones and skulls of species they'd wiped out. Giant, tattered banners, literally stitched together from the flags of fallen worlds, fluttered between cannons the size of skyscrapers. And for the final touch, every ship was broadcasting a symphony of pure terror. The recorded last words and desperate screams from hundreds of civilizations that were now just ghost stories. This was psychological warfare cranked up to 1,000. "The human diplomatic ship is approaching," his second-in-command reported. He was a lanky alien whose skin changed color with his mood. Right now, he was a shimmering, arrogant purple. Zixth just smiled. The humans were basically toddlers who had just learned to walk in the galactic playground. They had only been zipping between stars for a couple of 100 years, controlling a tiny neighborhood of about 30 systems. Their technology was adorable. And their military? It was a glorified Coast Guard, with little patrol ships that couldn't even scratch the paint on one of his battleships. The human ship that floated towards them was like a guppy swimming up to a great white shark. It was small, sleek, and efficient. No spooky decorations, no flashing red lights. It was just a ship. Almost boringly practical. "Put them on the main screen," Zixth commanded. "Let's get this surrender over with so I can get some lunch." The view screen lit up, showing the bridge of the human ship. A single man stood there in a simple, clean uniform. He had dark hair and calm, intelligent eyes that seemed to soak in every detail without a trace of fear. According to their files, this was a Captain Park Minjin, a diplomatic nobody. "Captain Park," Zixth's voice boomed, a sound literally engineered to make moons tremble. "You are looking at the might of the Galactic Hegemony Council. We are an alliance of 4,000 species, masters of over 70,000 worlds. Now, allow me to give you a little preview of what happens when people tell us no." With a casual flick of his wrist, Zixth hit play. Massive holographic images exploded in the space between the fleets, showing planet after planet being swallowed by fire. Cities crumbled into ash. Panicked aliens ran for their lives. It was a greatest hits album of total annihilation, edited for maximum psychological damage. The videos showed parents pleading for their children's lives and proud warriors dropping their weapons in total despair. It was a masterclass in capturing the exact moment a species loses all hope. The whole time, Zixth stared at Captain Park's face, waiting for it to crack. This was the moment it always happened. The trembling hands, the sweat on the brow, the silent scream that appears in their eyes. Some would cry, others would try to act tough even as their bodies shook with terror. But every single one of them understood in that instant that fighting back was completely hopeless. Captain Park's reaction, however, was weird. His lips were pressed into a thin white line, like he was fighting with all his strength to hold something back. His shoulders were vibrating, but just slightly. Was this how humans showed fear? The intel reports had been a little unclear on their stress signals. "This is the price of defiance," Zixth roared, getting into his performance. He'd given this speech 1,000 times. The hegemony offers a simple choice. Join us, and your people will live. Resist, and you will be erased. Suddenly, Captain Park slapped a hand over his mouth and let out a choked sound, his face turning a deep shade of red. Ah, there it is, Zix thought with smug satisfaction. The terror is finally breaking him. The human was trying to stay composed, but his body was betraying him. We have crushed empires with weapons you can't even imagine, Zix continued, enjoying himself. We shattered civilizations that ruled the stars for 10,000 years before your ancestors even discovered fire. We have turned entire planets into dead rocks that now serve as a warning to anyone who would dare oppose us. He then ordered the holograms to zoom in on the skulls decorating his own ship, each one a trophy from a species that had made the wrong choice. The camera lingered on some of the stranger-looking skulls, a silent reminder of the hegemony's absolute power. By now, Captain Park's shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. He looked like he was having trouble breathing. His face was the color of a tomato, and his eyes were watering. I must, Park sputtered, his voice cracking. I have to request a brief recess to speak with Earth. This is an incredibly important decision. Hook, line, and sinker, Zix thought, a smug grin spreading across his face. The human was so terrified he could barely talk. He was just trying to buy a few pathetic hours, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. You have 12 of your hours, Zix said, feeling generous. Think about your options very carefully, Captain Park. Look at our fleet, count our guns, and know that this is only a tiny fraction of our real power. I will expect your unconditional surrender when we speak again. With that, he ended the call. Zix turned to his bridge crew, looking triumphant. Another one for the history books. Now, let's turn up the heat. I want every intimidation system on full blast. By the time that captain calls back, he'll be begging us to let him surrender. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine of terror. Across the vast armada, more spooky lights flared on, more ghostly screams echoed through space, and the ships moved into an even scarier formation. But what Zix couldn't possibly know was that on that tiny human ship, Captain Park Minjin had finally lost his fight for composure. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was laughing. He was laughing so hard that tears were streaming down his face, and every time he glanced at a replay of the hegemony's scary fleet, he would bend over, howling with laughter all over again. And all around him, his entire crew was doing the exact same thing. Sir, his first officer said, wiping a tear of pure amusement from her eye, I'm trying to write this report for Earth Command, but I can't stop laughing. Did you see the skulls they basically glued to their ships? It looks like they robbed a Halloween store. Park took a deep, shaky breath, trying to get a grip. I know. We have to be professional. They obviously think this is really serious, even if it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. He opened a secure channel to Earth, and a moment later, the faces of humanity's top leaders appeared. Park tried his best to give the report with a straight face, detailing the fleet, the threats, and the whole spooky performance. After he finished, there was a long, shocked silence from the command center. Then, a quiet little snort came from a general. A second later, the entire room erupted in roaring, side-splitting laughter. My apologies, Captain, Admiral Kim said, gasping for air. But did they honestly think that skulls would scare us? Have they done any research on humans at all? All signs point to no, Admiral, Park replied. They seemed really proud of them. I think this strategy actually works on other species. Oh, it definitely does, a new voice cut in. It was Dr. Sarah Martinez, humanity's top expert on alien psychology. Most species that make it to space are collaborative, not competitive. They're usually cautious, peaceful, and focused on community. The whole idea of violent death is fundamentally horrifying to them, she explained. But humans, we're the freaks of the galaxy. We are one of the only top predators to ever achieve spaceflight. We evolved over millions of years by both hunting and being hunted. For us, death isn't some scary abstract thing. It's an old neighbor. We've spent our whole history telling stories about it, making art about it, and even turning it into a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. So their big, scary fear campaign just doesn't work on us, Park said, the light bulb going on over his head. It's worse than that, Martinez corrected him, a huge grin on her face. It doesn't just fail to scare us. It lands right in the category of things we find hilarious. This over-the-top, trying way too hard brand of scary, we invented entire genres for it. We call them horror movies, haunted houses, and heavy metal concerts. We literally pay money to be scared for fun. On paper, it was a slaughter waiting to happen. Our tiny diplomatic fleet, designed for handshakes and treaties, was pulling up to meet the alien armada captained by Park. Nobody back home thought the hegemony, as they called themselves, were actually going to open fire. I mean, if you wanted to wipe us out, why put on such a ridiculously over-the-top light show first? As our ship slid into formation, our crews weren't at battle stations. They were plastered against the windows, taking pictures of the alien fleet. Within minutes, those photos were everywhere online. And aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Zixth was getting seriously confused. My intelligence team was supposed to be picking up humanity's terrified, encrypted pleas for mercy. Instead, they were getting something that made zero sense. My lead specialist turned to me, her voice trembling with confusion. "Admiral, the humans are broadcasting on open channels. It's not military code. They call it social media." "Put it on the main screen," I ordered. The view screen filled with a chaotic stream of human messages. I watched, completely baffled, as human sailors posted pictures of my terrifying fleet with captions like, "Okay, this is the most amazing haunted house I've ever seen," and "Wow, these aliens really go all out for Halloween." They were comparing my state-of-the-art warships to theme park attractions and saying we were trying way too hard to be spooky. One post, which was getting a crazy number of likes, was a close-up of the terrifying skull emblem on my flagship. The human text scrawled over it read, "This is what happens when you order your galaxy-conquering fleet from a Spirit Halloween store." "What is a Halloween ka?" I demanded. The word felt bizarre on my tongue. My xenocultural advisor, a scholar who had studied thousands of civilizations, started frantically digging through our databanks. The answer he found only made things weirder. "Sir, it seems to be a human holiday. They wear scary costumes and decorate their homes with symbols of death, for fun. Apparently, it's mostly for their children." A wave of pure, unfiltered confusion washed over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in my entire military career. They have their children celebrate death and as a game? According to the data, yes, Admiral. They also pay to visit places called haunted houses, where other humans try to scare them on purpose in a controlled environment. They seem to find this enjoyable. Just then, another officer cut in. "Sir, Captain Park is hailing us. He says he's ready to deliver humanity's formal reply." I straightened my uniform, trying to dismiss the absurdity. This had to be a bluff, a weird coping mechanism. Some species used humor to hide their fear. Yes, that had to be it. "Put him through," I commanded. Captain Park's face appeared on the screen, looking far more relaxed than he had before. He looked every bit the professional diplomat, but I could swear I saw a hint of a smile in his eyes. "Grand Admiral Zixth," Park began, "I've consulted with my government, and we have an official response to your ultimatum. But first, we were hoping you could clear up a cultural question for us." "Go on," I said, my patience wearing thin. "The design of your fleet is incredibly detailed. It's obvious you put a ton of effort into it. We just want to make sure we understand your intention. Is all of this," Park gestured vaguely, "supposed to be scary?" The question was so out of left field that I was speechless for a second. "Of course it's supposed to be scary. It represents the doom of all who defy the hegemony." Park nodded thoughtfully. "Right. Okay. Grand Admiral, I think we might be having a bit of a cultural misunderstanding. You see, we humans, we tend to have a slightly different reaction to scary visuals and intimidation than you might be used to." He gave an order, and new images flashed onto the screen, showing human kids in skeleton pajamas, carrying bags overflowing with candy. There were pictures of houses decorated with fake gravestones and smiling ghosts. Then came videos of people screaming with laughter while being chased down dark hallways by actors in monster costumes. This, Park explained gently, is Halloween. It's one of our biggest holidays. We use skulls and skeletons as party decorations. We actively seek out things that will scare us because we think it's fun when we know there's no real danger. More images appeared. Posters for horror movies called Alien Invasion and Space Monsters, book covers with terrifying alien creatures, and commercials for theme parks featuring giant, elaborate monster statues. We have entire billion-dollar industries dedicated to making scary things just to entertain ourselves, Park continued. For us, when something tries this hard to look terrifying, our brain doesn't register it as a threat. It sees a familiar pattern, assumes it's all for show, and the result is, well, we usually find it pretty funny. I just stared, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. Are you telling me that our fleet, a design perfected over 50,000 years of galactic conquest, looks like a theme park ride to you? Park's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine pity. I'm saying it's a cultural blind spot for us, Admiral. We see what you were going for. But the fact that we can see you trying so hard to be intimidating tells us you're probably not a genuine threat. Truly dangerous things don't need a costume, they just are. All around my command bridge, my officers stared at each other in total disbelief. Our greatest weapon, the psychological warfare strategy that had forced hundreds of planets to surrender without firing a shot, was completely useless. It was a joke to these strange primates who had somehow managed to turn fear itself into a form of entertainment. Something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was pure, white-hot rage, mixed with a deep, burning humiliation. Enough! My voice roared across the deck. If they will not fear our appearance, they will fear our weapons. Power up all weapon systems. We will give them a real reason to be scared. Across the entire hegemony fleet, weapons of unimaginable power came online. Planet-cracking siege cannons emerged from their armored casings. Bays of antimatter torpedoes hissed open, revealing warheads that could turn a solar system into cosmic dust. Quantum destabilizers, designed to tear holes in the fabric of space-time itself, began to hum with terrifying energy. "Target their closest moon!" I screamed. "Let's see if the humans find this entertaining." The entire fleet fired as one. The moon, a silent observer of eons of history, simply ceased to exist. The siege cannons shattered it into a million fragments. The antimatter warheads vaporized the debris. The quantum destabilizers wiped the remaining dust from reality, leaving only empty space where a world had once been. "Again!" I bellowed. "Target the asteroid belt!" A horrifying light show followed, with each volley demonstrating a different, terrifying capability of the hegemony's military. It was a display of absolute power that should have sent any other species in the galaxy to their knees, begging for mercy. On the human ships, however, a very different conversation was taking place. The reaction was not what I expected. "Whoa, did you guys see the containment field on that antimatter warhead?" an engineer shouted over an open channel. "That magnetic bottle is centuries ahead of our tech." "Forget that! Get a sensor lock on their quantum destabilizer!" another voice yelled back, buzzing with excitement. "They're using a cascade effect to peel back layers of reality. I have to get this data to the labs on Earth." "Don't worry, I'm recording everything in high definition," a third voice said calmly. "This is the single greatest weapons demonstration our military has ever witnessed, and the best part is, it's free. We're getting perfect technical specs on their entire arsenal." I listened to the intercepted chatter, my jaw hanging open. They weren't afraid, they were excited. They were treating my display of world-ending power like a free masterclass, taking notes like eager university students. "Explain this," I snarled at my xenocultural advisor. The poor man was sweating bullets as he sorted through the new information. "Admiral, It seems humans have a cultural obsession with something they call reverse engineering. Their entire technological history is based on looking at a complex device and immediately wanting to take it apart to figure out how it works. Intelligent species do that, I snapped. Yes, Admiral, but with humans. It's practically a national pastime, a puzzle. Seeing superior technology doesn't make them feel inferior. It makes them excited to figure it out and build a better version. Their first faster-than-light engine was invented because they saw a natural space-time anomaly and just worked backward from what they observed. At that exact moment, another officer approached, his face ashen. Sir, we're receiving official hails from 3 separate human science stations. They're asking if we have any unexploded ordnance they could have for research purposes. They want to study our weapons, Admiral. They're asking for free samples. This was supposed to be a show of force, the kind of terrifying power play that had brought 1,000 worlds to their knees. So why did Grand Admiral Zixth suddenly feel like he was working a customer service desk? A message popped up on his main screen. It read, "The antimatter containment field you showcased could fix several major engineering hurdles for us. Can we get a closer look at an intact unit?" Before he could even wrap his mind around the audacity, Captain Park's face appeared again, looking almost sheepish. "Grand Admiral," he said, "so sorry about the eagerness of our science division. Your weapons demonstration was, let's just say, technically fascinating, but I've been asked to explain another little detail about human psychology that might clear things up." Zixth just stared, feeling the situation slip through his grasp. This impudent human had just turned his galactic ultimatum into a college lecture. You see, there's a term our xenobiologists use for humanity. Persistence predators, Park started, his tone calm and instructive, like a favorite teacher. We evolved on a planet that was, and I'm not exaggerating, actively trying to kill us. We have superstorms that can literally scour cities from the map, animals that are perfectly designed to hunt creatures our size, and diseases that mutate faster than we can invent cures for them. Our world has disasters that can rewrite geography overnight. Behind him, images of Earth filled the screen. A monstrous hurricane swirling over an ocean, a volcano spewing enough ash to block out the sun, the ground itself ripping apart in an earthquake, and floodwaters devouring entire nations. It was a planet of stunning, lethal violence. To survive that, Park said, you learn to think a certain way. An obstacle isn't a dead end, it's just a puzzle you haven't solved yet. When we're faced with something massive and dangerous, our first thought isn't to run away, he went on. It's to figure out how it works, take it apart, and learn how to defeat it. New images appeared, this time from human history. People climbing the world's tallest, most treacherous mountains just to say they did. People diving to the deepest, most crushing parts of the ocean just to see what was down there. People strapping themselves to controlled explosions and pointing them at the moon long before they had any guarantee of survival, all because they just had to find out. We also got very, very good at recognizing a real threat, Park added. Things that just make a lot of noise and flash a lot of lights. They don't really set off our alarms. On Earth, the things that will actually kill you don't waste energy on looking scary. A tiger doesn't roar before it strikes. A tsunami doesn't fire a warning shot, Park concluded. Real danger is quiet. A cold, sinking feeling began to form in the pit of Zixth's stomach. Are you suggesting that our display of power proves we aren't a legitimate threat? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm suggesting, Park replied, choosing his words carefully, that your display proves you'd prefer to avoid a real conflict. Species that are truly committed to destruction don't show off their arsenal first, they just start shooting. He let that sink in. Your big, flashy demonstration tells us you think a war would be costly, even for an empire like yours. Zixth's Peltherin advisor began to nod slowly. He is correct, Admiral. Our entire military doctrine is based on forcing a surrender, because actual war is unpredictable and expensive. We have simply never encountered a species that saw through the posture so quickly, the advisor admitted in a low voice. And one other thing, Park continued. Humans have been the apex predator on our world for hundreds of thousands of years. We're accustomed to being the most dangerous thing around. So when we see a massive display of force, it doesn't scare us. It makes us curious. And it gets our strategists working. As if on cue, a new human broadcast was intercepted and thrown onto the main viewer. It was a live feed from a military strategy room. Human officers were calmly discussing how to fight Zixth's fleet. They weren't panicking or planning an escape. They were methodically breaking down how to win. Based on those energy readings, their primary siege cannons have a charge time of around 40 seconds, one analyst noted, his voice perfectly steady. That gives us a wide enough window to close the distance and target their weapon emitters directly. Another voice added, the antimatter torpedoes are dangerous, but they're slow. Our point defense grid should be able to intercept most of them if we maintain optimal range. The quantum destabilizers are the biggest issue, a third officer said, but it looks like they require a coordinated volley from multiple ships to be effective. If we can disrupt their formation, we can essentially neutralize that entire weapon system. A tidal wave of pure dread crashed over Zixth. The humans weren't afraid of his power. They were reverse engineering it, dissecting it, searching for its flaws. While his mighty fleet was posturing for the cameras, the humans were calmly planning a war like it was just another item on their to-do list. Captain Park, Zixth said, his voice almost gone. Are you saying that absolutely nothing we've shown you has frightened you at all? Park actually seemed to consider the question for a moment. Your technology is brilliant, Grand Admiral. Your weapons are potent, and your fleet is immense. But no, we're not scared. If you were truly going to wipe us out, you would have done it already. Instead, you're talking. And talking means you want something from us, which means there's room to negotiate. The communication link shut off. Zixth stood on the bridge of his flagship, a 50,000-year-old military doctrine built on fear, completely dismantled by a species that had barely figured out how to leave its own backyard. He was now faced with a choice he had never, ever had to consider. Waging a real war against an opponent that simply refused to be intimidated. It would be messy, it would be expensive, and if the galaxy found out the hegemony's bite wasn't nearly as bad as its bark, other races might start getting ideas. But before he could even form a command, every single alarm on every ship in both fleets began to shriek at once. "Admiral!" his sensor officer cried out, all four of his arms a blur across his console. "Dark space rupture! We have multiple signatures emerging at the system's edge!" On the main view screen, space itself seemed to tear open, and through these bleeding wounds in reality, something ancient and truly monstrous began to pull itself through. Zixth's blood turned to ice. He recognized those energy signatures. The Zilth, he whispered. They were the galaxy's real boogeymen. The Zilth weren't conquerors. They were a force of nature. A cosmic plague that scoured the galaxy clean every few hundred years. Their ships weren't manufactured, they were grown, ghastly, living abominations that consumed life itself. They never communicated, they never made threats, they just devoured. They would sterilize entire sectors of every living soul, leaving behind only a graveyard of cold, silent worlds. The Zilth fleet was smaller than the hegemonies, but that didn't matter in the slightest. Their vessels were twisted, pulsating horrors of organic matter. There was no design to them, no posturing, no attempt at intimidation. They were pure, lethal purpose. "All ships, defensive patterns!" Zix screamed, his voice cracking with a fear that was suddenly terribly real. "Prepare for an emergency jump!" Across his fleet, discipline evaporated into chaos. You couldn't bluff this enemy. This was the monster that other monsters ran from. But on the human ships, the response was completely, shockingly different. Captain Park's voice sliced through the panicked chatter, no longer the calm professor, but sharp as broken glass. "All human vessels, execute combat formation Delta. All weapons to maximum power. I want targeting solutions on those hostiles, now." Sixth stared, dumbfounded, as the small human fleet, instead of fleeing, tightened its formation and surged forward. They were deliberately placing themselves between the Zilth and Sixth's own terrified fleet. "Captain Park," Sixth yelled into his comms, "you have no idea what you're up against. You can't fight them. You can't negotiate with them. Your only hope is to run." Park's face flashed onto his screen, and the look in his eyes was colder and more terrifying than the Zilth themselves. The friendly teacher was gone. In his place was a man with eyes like forged steel, utterly devoid of fear. "We know exactly what they are, Admiral," Park said, his voice dangerously low. "We've met their kind before. 3 years ago, one of their scouting parties tried to harvest one of our colonies in the outer system." He paused for a beat, letting the words hang in the air. "We killed every single one of them." "That's impossible," Sixth stammered. "No one fights the Zilth and survives." "We," Park shot back, "are not no one. To all hegemony ships, we are pushing our tactical data to your network right now. Their organic hulls are resistant to energy weapons, but they're vulnerable to kinetic impact. Their regeneration cores are located here, here, and here," Park commanded, as a torrent of targeting information flooded the hegemony systems. "If you want to leave this system alive, you will follow our lead precisely." The Zilth fleet closed in, a silent, sickening tide of cosmic hunger. It made no distinction between a human ship or a hegemony one. To them, it was all just biomass. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, his voice filled with disbelief. "The human ships, they're moving to intercept. They're using their own fleet to shield us." Sixth was watching something that made absolutely no sense. The very species his fleet had come to push around, the creatures they had written off as nothing more than weak little prey, were now single-handedly saving them from certain destruction. It flew in the face of every rule of galactic power he'd ever been taught. The Zilth fired first. Massive globs of bioplasma, a glowing acid that could melt through standard shields, sailed toward the human ships. The humans didn't even bother to dodge. Their shields lit up like tiny novas, tanking the hits, and they fired back instantly. Human weapons were nothing like the hegemony's sophisticated tech. While the hegemony relied on elegant energy beams and complicated particle torpedoes, the human weapons were brutal and weirdly beautiful in their simplicity. The weapons they were using were unlike anything we'd ever encountered. Accelerators that hurled solid metal slugs at nearly the speed of light, and missiles so loaded with kinetic energy they didn't need to explode. They just blasted clean through whatever they hit. The very first Zilth ship that got tagged by a human railgun didn't just blow up. It was literally torn in half. Its living hull, engineered to regenerate from laser burns and plasma scoring, had zero defense against a giant metal brick punching straight through its heart. They actually know how to kill them," Sixth's tactical officer whispered, his voice dripping with disbelief. "The humans know how to fight the Zilth." Just then, a voice cut through the chaos on an open channel, a voice that every single ship in both fleets could hear. It was Captain Park, and his tone was as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand, the voice of a man who had clearly done this 1,000 times. "Human fleet, execute pattern gamma. Acute. Hegemony ships, if you want to be useful, focus your fire on the targets we've already cracked open. Don't waste your energy making new holes. Just pour it into the weak spots we're creating for you." One of Sixth's junior officers spun around to face him, his eyes wide with a sudden, desperate hope. "Admiral, your orders?" In that split second, Admiral Sixth made a decision that would have been completely unthinkable just an hour before. "All ships, you heard the human. Follow his lead. Dump every ounce of firepower you have exactly where he tells you to. We fight with them, or we all die here." The hegemony fleet, which moments ago was a fearsome conquering force, suddenly scrambled into new formations, trying to get in line with the human ships. It was a messy, awkward dance between two navies that had never even spoken, trying to find a rhythm in the middle of a slaughter. But the humans were unbelievably fast, shifting their own formations on the fly to cover the hegemony's blind spots and play to their strengths. A monstrous Zilth harvester ship locked onto a hegemony dreadnought, its grotesque biomechanical arms reaching out to literally chew the vessel to pieces. Before those tendrils could even scratch the ship's armor, 3 human vessels swarmed it like a pack of wolves, their weapons tearing into the organic beast with a cold, terrifying efficiency. "Hegemony Dreadnought Valor's call. Fall back and let your shields recharge," Park's voice commanded over the comms. "We've got this." All Zixth could do was stare as the humans fought with a ferocity he had never witnessed. They weren't fighting for glory or to prove a point. They were fighting to exterminate a plague. Their ships took hits that would have sent his own crews scrambling for the escape pods, but the humans just kept pushing forward. When their shields failed, they didn't pull back, they just kept shooting. When their hulls were torn open to the freezing vacuum of space, they simply rerouted power from life support systems to keep the guns hot. He watched in a mix of horror and awe as one human cruiser, its entire left side a glowing ruin of molten metal, deliberately rammed a Zilth harvester. The explosion that followed vaporized them both, but it shattered the Zilth formation just long enough for a wave of human ships to pour into the gap. "Captain Park's ship is taking heavy fire," one of Zixth's officers yelled out. "His shields are down to 15%. Zixth shot a look at his tactical display. Park's vessel, the very same diplomatic ship that had started this whole mess, was holding the most critical position in the battle, intentionally drawing fire from 3 Zilth cruisers so a crippled hegemony battleship could limp to safety. "All ships in range!" Zixth roared, his voice booming across his own bridge. "Focus all fire on the Zilth ships targeting Captain Park. Now!" The hegemony fleet reacted as one. Dozens of warships unleashed a tidal wave of energy beams and torpedoes at the ships threatening the human captain. The storm of firepower slammed into targets that had already been weakened and cracked open by human railguns. The combined assault was just too much. The Zilth, now facing a unified enemy fighting with a horrifying level of aggression and losing ships faster than they could count, finally broke. Their disgusting living vessels turned and fled, slithering back toward the dark rifts in space from which they'd come, off to find easier prey somewhere else in the galaxy. As the last Zilth ship vanished, a profound, exhausted silence fell over the 2 fleets. The human ships were battered. Some were little more than floating coffins, but they hadn't broken. In fact, they had just saved the very fleet that had come to make them surrender. Zixth opened a private channel to Captain Park. The human's face appeared on the view screen. His uniform was torn, his face was smudged with soot, and the bridge behind him was a chaotic scene of sparking consoles and frantic crew members. "Captain Park," Zixth began, choosing his words carefully, "you risked everything, your ships, your people, to save us. Why?" Park looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his eyes were steady. "Because the Zilth were the real enemy here, Admiral. You're just an expanding empire. That's business. The Zilth wipe entire species from existence. That's a different problem entirely. We know the difference. Your people fight with a savagery I couldn't have imagined," Zixth admitted. "You saw our fleet, you heard our demand for your surrender, and you laughed at us. You assumed we weren't a real threat," Park shot back. "But humanity learned a long, long time ago that the creatures who puff out their chests and try to look big and scary are almost never the ones you actually need to worry about. The Zilth don't make threats. They don't posture. They just show up and start killing everything. That's what a real monster looks like. And that's when we stop laughing." As the human ships began making emergency repairs right there in the void, the hegemony fleet just floated, their crews in a state of collective shock. The mission to intimidate humanity was a spectacular failure, but something far more important had been forged in the heat of that battle. It was respect, and it had been paid for with blood and steel. Grand Admiral Zixth sat in his command chair, replaying the battle logs for the 3rd time. What he was seeing defied every principle of space combat he had ever studied. The humans weren't just good. They fought with a brutal, relentless drive that was almost unnerving. When their shields gave out, they relied on their armor. When their armor was peeled away, they used their own mangled ships as weapons. When victory seemed impossible, they just found a new way to hit even harder. But it wasn't just mindless fury. Every single move was calculated. Every sacrifice served a purpose. The humans fought as if this was just another Tuesday for them, against a foe that made his own mighty fleet look like a child's toy. "Admiral," his xenocultural advisor interrupted his thoughts, his voice low. "I've dug deeper into human military history. I really think you need to see this." The scholar pulled up data that painted a truly chilling picture. Humanity's entire history was one long, unbroken war, not just against other species, but against their own planet, against disease, and most of all, against each other. "Humans have been fighting for their whole existence," the advisor said, his voice trembling slightly. "Not like us, with the occasional border dispute. I mean constant, non-stop conflict. For humanity, peace is just the brief moment they spend reloading. War is their natural state." Zixth watched clips from Earth's history, empires rising and falling in flames, new technologies invented for the sole purpose of killing more people more efficiently, entire cultures built around the glory of battle. Even their art and stories were soaked in it. "But that's not the most terrifying part," the advisor went on. "They are simultaneously the most fiercely competitive and the most profoundly cooperative species we've ever documented. They'll slaughter each other over a tiny patch of dirt one day, and then unite as a single, unstoppable force to fight a common enemy the next. They have these things called armies, massive organizations dedicated to nothing but the practice of organized violence. Most species grow out of such primitive ideas before they even reach for the stars," Zixth whispered. "Precisely. Most species learn how to get along first, and then they build starships. Humans built starships so they could have bigger wars. They're an apex predator that got smart, but never lost the instinct to hunt." Captain Park's face suddenly appeared on the main screen, cutting the briefing short. He looked rested now, wearing a fresh uniform, but his expression was just as serious. "Grand Admiral, I think it's time we talked about what comes next." Zixth sat up a little taller in his chair. "I agree. The original reason for my visit has become, well, irrelevant." "That's a polite way of putting it," Captain Park shot back, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips that never quite reached his exhausted eyes. "Let's be real. You warped in here to scare us into becoming another jewel in your imperial crown. We laughed in your face, and then we turned around and saved your entire armada from being turned into space dust. I'm guessing this particular outcome isn't in your First Contact for Dummies handbook." "No, Captain, it is not," Admiral Zixth conceded. "Frankly, I have absolutely no idea what my next move is. My mission is a complete failure, but the Hegemony Council will still expect a full report." Park gave a slow, understanding nod. "Then let me fill you in on a little something your intel files missed about humanity. We weren't laughing because we thought you were a joke. We laughed because trying to intimidate us is like trying to scare a great white shark by splashing it with water." "I'm beginning to understand that," Zixth admitted, his voice strained. "But you're missing the why," Captain Park said, his tone becoming surprisingly casual. "Look, for hundreds of thousands of years, humans were basically a walking buffet on a planet that had 1,000 different ways to kill you. We got very, very good at telling the difference between something that just makes a lot of noise and something that's actually about to eat you. See, Admiral, real predators don't roar before they strike. True danger doesn't flash a bunch of pretty lights to announce it's coming. The way you guys made your entrance? Our deepest instincts told us you weren't an immediate threat, so we could afford to be amused." "And the Zilth?" Zixth pushed. Park's friendly demeanor vanished in an instant. "The Zilth are a real threat. They don't make speeches, they don't posture, they just consume. When their scout ships stumbled upon our colony on Elysium 3 years ago, they opened fire without a single word. They slaughtered 80,000 of my people before we even knew we were at war. We had to learn how to fight them because we had no other choice," Park said, his expression hardening like stone. "We tracked those scouts back to their staging ground and wiped it from the star charts. We hunted down every last Zilth ship in this entire sector and tore them apart, piece by piece. We didn't do it for sport. We did it because we knew if even one of them escaped, they would just come back to murder more of our families." That level of aggression against the Zilth is unheard of, Zixth murmured, stunned. Is it? Or is it possible that most species never had to claw their way to the top of their own planet's food chain just to survive? Park leaned forward slightly. Admiral, let me tell you what a human really is. We are persistence predators. We evolved to literally run our prey into the ground, to chase it until its heart gave out from sheer exhaustion. We're pack hunters who developed complex, coordinated strategies. We are tool makers who were chipping flint into spearheads long before we ever figured out how to plant a single seed. But above all else, we are survivors. We have clawed our way through one apocalypse after another and have simply refused to lie down and die. He gestured to the view screen, which showed the battered but still fighting human ships. You just saw us go toe-to-toe with the Zilth. That's what happens when we stop being amused and decide to get serious. We don't fight to look tough. We don't fight for glory. We fight to win. And we do not stop until the job is done, one way or another. A cold tremor ran down Zixth's primary nerve cluster. You're saying your entire species is violent? Not at all, Park corrected him, his voice firm. I'm saying we're survivors. Violence is just one of the tools in our toolbox, and it's one we only pull out when we absolutely have to. But you have to understand this about us. We would much rather cooperate than fight. We would rather build a bridge than burn one down. We will always, always choose peace if it is a real possibility. But, Zixt prompted, feeling the unspoken word hanging in the air between them. But when peace is off the table, when our people are threatened, or when we've given our word to protect an ally, we are very, very good at violence, because as a species, we've been practicing for our entire existence. Park straightened up, his relaxed posture shifting into something more official. So, Grand Admiral, here is humanity's formal reply to your ultimatum. We will not bow to the hegemony. We completely reject your claim to our worlds. However, we are more than happy to open diplomatic talks, sign trade pacts, and even form an alliance for our mutual defense. What just went down out here proves that we can be incredibly good friends to have in your corner when things get ugly. The Council will never approve such a thing, Zixth said, but the conviction in his voice was already wavering. The Council will approve whatever you recommend, Park countered smoothly. You're the Grand Admiral. You have the authority to negotiate new terms. And I think, if you're being honest with yourself, you know that trying to beat humanity into submission would cost you a hell of a lot more than you could ever gain by simply making us your friends. Zixth considered it. He replayed the chaotic battle, remembering how the human ships had moved to shield his own flagship, even after he had threatened to obliterate them. He thought about the cold, methodical way they had dismantled the Zilth fleet, and the chilling realization that if humanity ever directed that same focus at the hegemony, it would be a complete and utter catastrophe. What you are suggesting has never been done, he said at last. No species has ever told the hegemony no and been allowed to remain independent. Then we'll be the first, Park said with a simple shrug. Admiral, you arrived with a fleet built to scare the daylights out of us. You put on a big light show designed to make us tremble in our boots. But humans don't get scared by displays of power. We respect actual capability, and that has to be proven through action, not through empty threats. And today, we proved our capability, Zixth said slowly, the idea beginning to take hold. Yes, you did. You fought surprisingly well alongside us. Your ships, while clearly designed more for intimidation than a real brawl, were still effective when you used them correctly. Your crews adapted to a rapidly changing situation with incredible speed. Your actions today have earned our respect. Park smiled, and this time it was a real smile that lit up his eyes. See, that's the difference. Respect builds bridges. Fear only builds resentment and eventually rebellion. You can't hold an empire of 1,000 star systems together by scaring everyone into obedience. Sooner or later, someone is going to call your bluff, and if your scare tactics are all you have, you've got no plan B. You want us to completely overhaul our entire strategy for expansion, Zixth stated. What I'm suggesting, Park said, is that you've already started. We won't be your subjects, but we will be your partners. We'll share technology, coordinate our defenses, open trade routes, and help you keep this corner of the galaxy safe from genuine threats like the Zilth, but we do it as equals. Zixth made a decision right then, a choice that could easily get him court-martialed but might also save billions of lives. I will present your proposal to the Council, a new direction for the hegemony. Species who can prove they can contribute to our collective security will be offered a partnership, not conquest. They might just laugh you out of the room, Park warned. They might. But today taught me a valuable lesson. Humanity won't be the last species that isn't impressed by your fireworks. Your psychology is different, but it can't be unique. Eventually, the hegemony is going to run into another species that doesn't react to threats the way we expect them to. It's better to have a diplomatic option on the table before we accidentally kick a hornet's nest we can't handle. That's a very smart way of looking at it, Admiral, Park conceded. Just as Zixth was about to end the transmission, his communications officer chimed in. Admiral, one of our intelligence analysts has a peculiar question about human culture. Patch him through. Sir, he wants to know if humans find our threat displays amusing because they resemble their Halloween decorations, and if Halloween is a holiday where they intentionally try to scare each other for fun, does that mean the humans actually enjoyed being threatened by us? A very long, very uncomfortable silence stretched across the comm channel. Then, from the bridge of the human flagship, came the very same sound that had started this entire bizarre encounter. Captain Park was laughing again. Admiral, Park managed to say, catching his breath, let me be perfectly clear. We weren't laughing because we enjoyed your threat. We were laughing because your threat wasn't threatening. It was like watching a little kid hide behind a curtain with his feet sticking out, then leap out and scream, "Boo!" It's hilarious because it's trying so desperately to be scary and failing so completely. So if we had just attacked you, without any warning or theatrics? Zixth asked. Park's laughter cut off instantly. His face became stone-cold serious. Then we wouldn't have had time to laugh. We would have been too busy fighting for our lives. And that, Admiral, is the entire point. Things that are truly dangerous don't need to put on a show. They just act. The human ships began to maneuver, charting a course back towards their own space. The hegemony fleet hung in the silent void, watching them go, no longer certain if they had just met the harmless prey they came to conquer or the apex predator they should have been trying to befriend all along. On the flagship's bridge, a young officer turned to his commander. Admiral, what are we going to tell the Council? Zixth watched the human ships blink out of existence as they entered hyperspace, thinking about a species that made a game out of being scared, that fought with terrifying efficiency, and was somehow both completely ridiculous and profoundly horrifying at the exact same time. Here's what we're going to tell them, he stated at last. We encountered a species that doesn't respond to our intimidation. We tried to frighten them, and they laughed at us. Later, we fought alongside them against a common enemy, and they proved to be the most formidable allies we've ever had. We will also state that humanity declined our offer of subjugation and instead proposed an alliance of equals. The officer lowered his voice. And what if the Council refuses and launches an attack anyway? Zixth recalled the human ships forming a protective barrier around his own. He remembered their cold, deadly precision in the heat of battle, and he remembered Captain Park's vow to either win the fight or die trying. In that case, Zixth said, we will advise the Council that such a conflict would be long, brutal, and ultimately unwinnable, because humans never, ever surrender. As his damaged ship limped away from human territory, Zixth finally opened the intel file about the human holiday known as Halloween. He scrolled through images of small children dressed as monsters, their faces bright with smiles and laughter. He saw pictures of adults decorating their homes with fake skeletons and spider webs just for fun. In that instant, it all clicked. Humans hadn't simply conquered their fears, they had domesticated them. They had taken the galaxy's most potent weapon of control, fear itself, and transformed it into a game for their children. There's no way to threaten a species like that. The only option is to learn to respect them. And Zixth was just beginning to grasp that respect was a currency worth far more than fear ever could be. You know that saying about kicking a guy when he's down? For the colossal Croc Empire, that wasn't just an expression, it was their guiding principle. From the command bridge of his warship, the Crimson Fang, Commander Zethor watched the final defense satellite of a Velian colony vanish in a silent explosion of cosmic glitter. He folded his enormous arms, a deep sense of pride warming him. Another world shattered, another prize for his emperor. His second-in-command's voice was full of admiration. That brings the count to 47 systems, sir. The Velian resistance was crushed in only 6 hours. Zethor clicked his mandibles, the croc version of a smug chuckle. 6 hours. He was almost impressed. The Velians were brave, he'd grant them that, but bravery doesn't stand a chance against plasma cannons. After 3 centuries of bulldozing their way across the galaxy, the Croc Empire operated on a single, brutal truth. The only language anyone really understands is overwhelming power. Just then, a sharp ping came from the communication station. It was a message flagged with the highest priority from High Command. Zethor strolled over, expecting new orders to go flatten some other unfortunate species that had gotten too big for its britches. But the words on the screen gave him pause. A new species had just stumbled into their section of space. They were called humans. They hailed from the third rock orbiting some generic yellow star. Their technology was an absolute joke. They were using primitive fusion drives, basic energy weapons, and, he had to check this twice, their ships didn't seem to have any shields at all. The final assessment was simple. They posed 0 threat. This was going to be a piece of cake. The pictures that loaded on his display were so laughable, he almost let out a snort. Human ships were clumsy, unattractive boxes that looked more like historical relics than starships. The official analysis estimated their tech was at least 500 years behind the Croc. "Commander," his weapons officer announced, "we have new orders." "Let me guess," Zethor sighed, feigning immense boredom. "They want us to go welcome these humans to the neighborhood." "That's correct, sir. They're actually classifying it as a training mission for the junior crew. High Command anticipates we'll have all human settlements under our control within a few hours." A training mission. Zethor could hardly believe it. He was hoping for a genuine fight, but he followed his orders. Besides, adding another conquered species to his record would definitely boost his next performance review. "Chart a course to their closest colony," he ordered. "What's this one called?" "It's New Edinburgh, Commander. The population is roughly 3 million. Their defenses are, well, they're comical. A couple of small weapon platforms in orbit. They have no significant fleet to speak of." 3 million lives. The number didn't even register with Zethor. "We will offer them one opportunity to surrender. When they refuse, we'll vaporize their orbital junk and prepare the ground invasion. Standard procedure." His massive fleet of 200 warships moved in perfect unison, ripping open a tear in space-time to jump to faster-than-light speed. The journey would take 3 days, which Zethor used to study the intel on these humans. They came from a high-gravity planet with one big moon they named Earth. They had only recently figured out interstellar travel, their ships were sluggish, and their weapons were crude. The intelligence showed they had quickly established 7 colonies in the surrounding star systems, and every last one of them was a sitting duck. "They expanded far too quickly," his tactical officer observed, pointing at the star map. "They've spread themselves incredibly thin. It's a textbook rookie mistake." "It's a mistake every young species makes," Zethor declared with the self-assured tone of a seasoned veteran. "They invent a faster-than-light drive and suddenly believe the galaxy is theirs for the taking. Then they meet someone like us, and they get a harsh lesson. The galaxy doesn't belong to the ambitious, it belongs to the powerful." On the 3rd day, the fleet exited hyperspace right on the doorstep of New Edinburgh. "I want a full sensor scan, immediately," Zethor commanded. The colony was even more pathetic in person than the files had described. A single, barely livable planet, a few trading outposts, and a handful of tiny patrol vessels that looked like they'd lose a fight with a stray meteor. "Open a channel," Zethor snapped. "Broadcast on every frequency." His communications officer gave a crisp nod. "The channel is open, Commander." Zethor's voice, converted into the common galactic language, thundered across the system. "Attention, human colonists of New Edinburgh. This is Commander Zethor of the mighty Croc Empire. You are trespassing in our sovereign space. You have one of your hours to surrender without condition. If you fail to comply, we will completely obliterate your orbital defenses and begin a ground occupation. You will not get a second warning." He cut the transmission and settled back into his command throne, waiting. New species always reacted one of three ways. They surrendered instantly, they pleaded for their lives, or they mounted a futile, heroic defense. 5 minutes went by. Then, a voice crackled through their speakers. "Commander Zethor, this is Governor Chen of New Edinburgh." The voice was human, male, and sounded strangely composed. "We've received your message. I think it's only right to let you know that this colony is protected by the Terran Colonial Navy. I would strongly suggest you turn your fleet around and prevent any unnecessary conflict. Please, think very carefully about your next decision." A loud clattering sound erupted as Zethor clicked his mandibles in laughter. Unnecessary conflict? The little human spoke as if he had any say in the matter, as if his pathetic little toys could scratch the paint on 200 state-of-the-art warships. "Sir, the human is refusing to comply," his second-in-command said, stating the obvious. "Then we move forward as planned," Zethor answered, his voice becoming cold as steel. "Target their orbital platforms, reduce them to atoms, but don't touch the planet yet. Once they watch their shields in the sky disappear, their tune will change." The fleet moved forward like a giant armored predator. It was a vicious dance the Croc had mastered over centuries. To be honest, it was starting to get a little dull. The human platform shot first, launching a wave of primitive-looking missiles. The missiles splashed harmlessly against the Croc shields, like pebbles hitting a fortress wall. In response, 50 of Zethor's ships fired their plasma cannons in a single, perfectly timed volley. The orbital stations didn't explode. They simply ceased to exist, replaced by silent, expanding spheres of superheated plasma. But then, something felt off. "Commander," the sensor officer said, his voice laced with confusion. "The civilian ships are evacuating, but they're not panicking. They're moving in flawless formations. There's no chaos, sir. Not a bit." Zethor leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the display. The officer was right. The human vessels were retreating with a level of discipline he'd expect from a battle-hardened navy. Where was the terror? Where were the desperate pleas for help? "They're not fighting back," his weapons officer pointed out. "But they aren't giving up either," Zethor murmured, a small seed of doubt taking root in his mind. "Continue the attack. They'll crack." At that precise moment, the sensor officer leaped from his seat. "Commander, a new contact! It's emerging from behind the planet's moon. It's a single vessel, but its size. Commander, it's gargantuan. It's 3 times the mass of our flagship." Zethor's head snapped toward the main view screen. A single, colossal silhouette was gliding out from behind the moon. As it drifted into the light, every sensor on the bridge began to shriek. Its hull was made of some dark, unknown material that absorbed all light. Its energy readings were literally off the charts. And for something so massive, it moved with a silent, terrifying grace. "That can't be a human ship," his tactical officer whispered, his voice filled with pure disbelief. But as the shape got closer, a perfectly clear signal sliced through the noise, announcing the ship's name in both his own tongue and the galactic standard, TCNS Indomitable, a Terran Colonial Navy vessel, destroyer class. A destroyer? Zethor's brain stuttered. If that monstrous thing was what they called a destroyer, what in the name of the stars did they consider a battleship? For the first time in a long and celebrated career, Commander Zethor felt a strange, cold feeling slither up his spine. It was fear. The human ship prowled like a predator circling its prey, its hull a flat, non-reflective black that just seemed to drink the light. The entire vessel was a symphony of sharp, deadly angles, covered in weapon systems that looked way too big to even be real. "I want a full sensor reading on that vessel right now!" Zethor barked, fighting to keep the tremor out of his voice. "I need to know every single thing about it." His officer's hands flew across the console in a blur. "Sir, our sensors can't even get a reading through its hull. The material is something we've never encountered. And the energy signatures, they don't exist in any known galactic database. Commander, the power output we're seeing should be physically impossible for a ship of that size." "Nothing is impossible," Zethor snapped back, but his own words sounded empty. "It's one ship. We have 200. At that moment, the communications channel blinked on. A human woman's face appeared on the main screen. Her dark hair was tied back in a crisp military bun. Her uniform was perfect, and her face was totally calm, as if staring down a fleet of 200 enemy warships was just a boring part of her day. "Commander Zethor," she said, her voice perfectly level and cool in flawless galactic common. "My name is Captain Park of the Terran Colonial Navy ship, the Indomitable. You have initiated an unprovoked assault on a colony under Terran protection. This is your one and only opportunity to withdraw your fleet peacefully. I highly advise you take it." Zethor's initial shock of fear instantly boiled over into white-hot rage. The nerve! How could this primitive creature talk to him like she was the one in charge? He had 200 warships. She had one. "Captain Park," he shot back, dripping as much scorn as he could into her inferior rank. "I am Commander Zethor of the unstoppable Kroth Empire, and I don't take advice from a species that just figured out how to leave its home system. You're outnumbered 200 to 1. I'll give you the same choice I offered your little friends on that colony. Surrender this instant, or be wiped from existence." But Captain Park's expression never changed. Not a flicker of fear, not a moment of doubt, just a cold, professional calm that sent a shiver down Zethor's back he didn't expect. "I see," she replied softly. "You've made your decision. The consequences are now yours to bear alone." The comms link went dead. "Arrogant human," Zethor's second-in-command grumbled next to him. "She can't seriously think one big ship can take on our entire armada." "All ships," Zethor announced to the fleet, his voice ringing with a confidence he didn't feel. "Target the human vessel. Unleash everything you have on my command. It's time we taught these humans what happens when they challenge the Kroth Empire." 200 warships shifted into a flawless attack pattern, their weapon systems humming with unimaginable power. Plasma cannons whined as they powered up to full capacity. Missile hatches slid open, showing off rows of deadly warheads. Every single weapon in the fleet locked onto that lone human ship. "Fire!" Zethor bellowed. The void between the two forces exploded into a blinding hurricane of raw power. Tsunami-like waves of plasma, searing laser beams, and hundreds of missiles all slammed into the Indomitable. It was enough firepower to shatter a planet's surface, more than enough to vaporize an entire fleet of lesser ships. The onslaught lasted for a full 30 seconds. When the dazzling light finally died down, Zethor leaned forward, expecting to see nothing but shattered, drifting pieces of a wreck. Everyone on the bridge was expecting to see twisted metal and the frozen corpses of the crew tumbling through the blackness of space. But instead, the human ship, the Indomitable, was just sitting there, completely untouched. 200 of the Empire's strongest warships had just unleashed absolute hell on it, and there wasn't so much as a scorch mark on its hull. Its shields didn't even glow. All of that destructive energy had done absolutely nothing. And if you think that's crazy, you are not going to believe what they did next. If you're loving this story, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more. "Impossible," someone whispered on the bridge. Zethor couldn't tell if it was one of his officers or the thought screaming in his own head. "Sensors!" he yelled. "Status report! Did we somehow miss?" "No, Commander," the sensor officer answered, his voice shaking. "Every single shot was a direct hit, but their shields, they just soaked it up. The energy just disappeared into them. Sir, our weapons had zero effect." Zethor stared at the view screen, his brain completely failing to understand what he was seeing. It just wasn't possible. No shield technology in the entire galaxy could take a hit like that without at least showing some kind of strain. Unless every single thing they thought they knew about these humans was a devastating lie. The comms channel crackled back to life, and Captain Park's face once again filled the screen. Her expression hadn't changed at all. She still had that disappointed look, like a teacher who just watched a student fail the easiest pop quiz. "You've had your turn," she said, her voice as cold and vast as space itself. "All ships, evasive action, now!" Zethor screamed into the fleet-wide comm, realizing a fraction of a second too late that it was already over. The Indomitable fired just one weapon. A single railgun on its bow lit up for less than a second, firing a projectile so incredibly fast it was completely invisible. The slug made of tungsten crossed the immense gap between the fleets in the time it took to blink. It struck Zethor's flagship, the legendary Crimson Fang, hitting it dead center. The ship's shields, the very same shields that had saved them in countless battles, simply ceased to exist. The projectile ripped through the warship's reinforced hull like it was tissue paper. The gigantic ship bucked violently from the impact before splitting perfectly in two, sheared right down the middle from the insane kinetic force. Zethor was hurled across the bridge, smashing hard into his command throne. Red alert sirens wailed. Half of his bridge crew were instantly sucked out into the vacuum of space when the hull gave way. Shimmering emergency force fields snapped on, barely containing the air inside the command center. "Damage report!" He somehow managed to scream over the piercing alarms. "The ship is gone, Commander," his second-in-command said, his voice empty and broken. "We're only alive because the command pod is reinforced. Life support might last a few hours." Zethor pulled himself to his feet and stared at the few screens that were still online. The whole back half of his flagship was now just a mangled mess of wreckage, tumbling away with its engines dead and silent. The front half, where he was completely powerless. But that's not what made his blood run cold. The human warship hadn't budged. It was just floating there, watching them. It could have destroyed his whole fleet with that single shot if it had aimed differently. It had the power, the flawless accuracy, and the mind-boggling technology. But it only fired once. They were sending a message, a horrifyingly clear one. The humans could have erased them from existence in a single moment, but they chose not to. They chose to show restraint. They chose to prove their absolute superiority without committing a slaughter. "Commander," the communications officer said weakly, "the rest of the fleet is awaiting orders." Orders? What could he possibly tell them? To attack? Every last one of them just witnessed what happened. Their weapons were like toys, and that single human ship could take them apart piece by piece without even trying. To retreat? That would be to admit a humiliating, soul-crushing defeat. It would mean the great Kroth Empire, conquerors of 47 star systems, had been brought to their knees by one ship from a race they called primitives. Zethor glanced at the looks of pure terror on the faces of his remaining crew. These were proud young warriors, raised to believe in the holy mission of the Kroth Empire. Now, their eyes were filled with nothing but raw, unfiltered fear. "All ships," he finally ordered, the words feeling like poison in his mouth. "Stand down. I repeat, do not fire on the human vessel. Get them on the screen." The Indomitable hung there in space, perfectly still, a massive predator observing its wounded prey, just waiting to see if it would try to fight back, waiting to see if the Kroth had learned their lesson or if they needed to be taught another one. In that one soul-shattering moment, Zethor finally understood the truth. The humans hadn't just taken their first baby steps out of their solar system. They had been out here for a very, very long time, watching, learning, and preparing. And when they finally revealed their true power, they did it with technology so far beyond his own that it made the entire Kroth armada look like children playing with bath toys. In a heartbeat, the hunters had become the hunted, their own arrogance blinding them to the trap until it snapped shut. A cold wave of panic washed through the Kroth fleet. Zethor could hear it in the frantic voices screaming over the command channel. His captains, hardened veterans of a dozen wars, sounded like terrified kids. "Commander, what are your orders?" one begged, his voice cracking. "Do we fight back?" another yelled. "Should we make a run for it?" a third pleaded. Zethor had no answers. His flagship was a graveyard, his crew gone, and the human ship just hung there with a chilling patience, like a teacher waiting for a class to realize just how badly they'd messed up. Then, some of his captains made the choice for him. 5 ships broke formation and ran, their engines screaming as they scrambled for the edge of the system, desperate to jump to light speed. "Idiots," Zethor breathed. Did they really think they could outrun that thing? But the human ship, the Indomitable, didn't even give chase. It just floated in the void, its weapons cold. Captain Park was letting them go. But why? The answer hit Zethor like a cannonball to the gut. She was letting them go to spread the word. The humans didn't just want a victory. They wanted an audience. They wanted the entire galaxy to hear this story. Spurred on by a deadly mix of pride and sheer terror, other captains chose to fight. 30 warships roared to life, charging the human vessel with their weapons blazing in a chaotic, desperate volley. A storm of plasma, lasers, and missiles once again lit up the darkness between the two fleets. The Indomitable finally moved. It didn't swerve or dodge. It simply pushed forward, its shield soaking up every single hit without so much as a shimmer. Then it fired back, not with the massive railgun that had shattered Zethor's command ship, but with its smaller systems. Point defense turrets locked onto each enemy vessel with terrifying accuracy. Laser cannons fired in a blistering volley, each shot placed with the skill of a surgeon, meant to disable, not destroy. The first Croth ship's engines blew out in a shower of sparks. The second had its weapon pods melted into slag. The third began to spin helplessly as its maneuvering thrusters were neatly vaporized. One by one, the charging warships were taken apart piece by piece. In less than 3 minutes, 30 warships were dead in the water. Not a single ship was destroyed. Their crews were alive, but they were completely helpless, adrift like broken toys. "By the spirits of our ancestors," Zethor's second-in-command whispered, his voice thick with awe. "They aren't even trying." And that was the most terrifying part. The human ship moved with an effortless grace, as if it were swatting away annoying flies. There was no urgency, no sign of strain, nothing at all to suggest this battle was anything more than target practice. Zethor fought through the pain and humiliation, forcing his mind to work. He thought back to every intelligence report on the humans, their primitive engines, their clunky weapons, their total lack of modern shields. Every single report had been a lie. How was this possible? The Croth had one of the best intelligence networks in the galaxy. They'd watched the humans for months before launching this supposedly easy invasion, analyzing every last wire and plate on their ships. So how in the universe did they get it so wrong? As his own flagship groaned around him, the answer slammed into Zethor, and it was 1,000 times more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. The humans hadn't made a mistake. They let the Croth see exactly what they wanted them to see. Those clumsy ships, that ancient technology, the paper-thin defenses. It was all a performance, a massive galaxy-wide stage play. But why? It was a test. The humans had been watching the Croth just as closely, waiting for them to show their true colors. And the moment they attacked that defenseless colony, the humans showed theirs. "They were baiting us," Zethor whispered, the words catching in his throat. "They knew we would come." "What are you talking about, Commander?" his first mate asked, his voice shaking. "The humans," Zethor said, his own voice heavy with the sickening realization. "They've been out here a lot longer than we knew. Way longer. They saw us conquer other worlds. They studied our tactics, our weapons, our very nature. They knew we'd see them as easy prey. They knew we would attack, and they planned this entire thing from the very beginning." It made a twisted kind of sense. The humans didn't just show up on the galactic stage when they finally discovered lightspeed travel. They arrived because they chose to. They hadn't built their fleet to fight the current powers of the galaxy. They built it to fight any enemy that could possibly exist, even threats that hadn't been born yet. And in doing so, they had become more powerful than anything that did exist. The comms console flickered on one last time. Captain Park's face appeared, and for the first time, Zethor felt like he was truly seeing her. She was young for a captain, probably not even 40 of his years, but her eyes held the kind of ancient wisdom you only get from fighting wars of true survival, not the easy conquests his people were used to. "Commander Zethor," she said, her voice as calm and solid as bedrock, "I'm going to explain a few things to you. I suggest you listen very, very closely, because your life and the lives of your remaining crew depend on you understanding me." Zethor said nothing. What could he possibly say? "The Indomitable," she went on, "is a destroyer-class ship." Captain Park's voice was like ice. "This ship," she said, "is just one of 12 identical vessels we have assigned to this tiny little corner of space. Across the entire Terran colonial navy, we have 400 ships of this class on active duty, and that's just where it starts. Above the destroyers, we have cruisers, above them, battleships, and at the very top, we have our dreadnoughts. Each class is significantly larger and more powerful than the last." She paused, letting that sink in. "My ship has a crew of 800. We have been on patrol for 5 years. In all that time, we have never fired our main weapons at another living thing. Today was the first. Do you understand what that means?" Zethor understood perfectly. It meant humanity held a level of power so immense, they'd never even had a reason to use it. Not until the Croth had finally pushed them too far. "Your intelligence reports called humans primitive," Captain Park continued, her expression unreadable. "And you weren't wrong. About where we were 20 years ago, you were 100% correct. But we humans learn fast. We adapt, we innovate. And above all else, we always prepare for the worst." She paused again. Through the shattered web of his view screen, Zethor could see the dead husks of his fleet floating by. "Humanity spent 500 years at war with itself," Captain Park said, her voice lowering slightly. "On our home world, we perfected combat. We created weapons that could have wiped out all life, and we nearly did it on 3 separate occasions. We learned a very hard lesson. Strength without wisdom is just a quick road to ruin. Power without discipline leads only to extinction." She leaned forward a bit, her eyes glinting. "When we finally made it to the stars, we found species just like you. Empires built on conquest. We watched you crush the Valians, the Taurans, the Hikari. For decades, we debated whether we should reveal ourselves or stay hidden in the shadows. And then, you attacked New Edinburgh." Zethor's voice was a dry whisper. "We only wanted—" "I know exactly what you wanted," Captain Park cut him off, her tone razor sharp. "That's why we let you get this far. That's why we didn't just turn your fleet into dust the second you entered our system. We needed to send a message, Commander, not just to your people, but to every empire in this galaxy that thinks might makes right." Zethor looked at the ruins of his bridge, at the faces of his fallen crew, at the mangled wreckage of his once invincible flagship. "Message received," he managed to choke out, the words tasting like ash. "Good," Captain Park said. "Now, here's what's going to happen. We're going to rescue your surviving crew. We're going to give medical care to your wounded. We will restore life support to your ships that are still functional. Then, you are going to fly back to your homeworld and tell your leaders exactly what happened here today." "They'll want revenge," Zethor said weakly. "The Empire will just send a bigger fleet." Captain Park didn't even blink. "Then we will send more messages, as many as it takes for the lesson to stick. This is what our mercy looks like, Commander Zethor. You should remember this day, because you will not get a second chance." Within the hour, the human rescue operation was underway. From the smoldering wreckage of his command bridge, Zethor watched as smaller craft launched from the colossal human warship, the TCS Indomitable. They were impossibly sleek, impossibly fast, and they moved with the same chilling confidence as the mothership that had just torn his fleet apart. "Commander," his communications officer choked out, "the humans are on the line. They're offering medical aid." "Take it," Zethor snapped, not wasting a single breath on pride. He couldn't afford it. The air was getting thin, and the groans of his wounded crew were getting weaker. A few minutes later, a human shuttle docked with his crippled ship. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures in bulky environment suits stepped inside, moving methodically as they scanned for threats and sampled the air. When the helmets came off, a jolt of disbelief shot through Zethor. The warriors who had just annihilated his forces were kids. They looked barely old enough to be called adults by his people's standards. One of them, tapping a medical symbol on her chest, asked, "Are you Commander Zethor?" Zethor's voice was a ragged whisper. "Why? Why would you help us? We were trying to destroy you." The medic, her name tag read Chen, gave him a look he couldn't quite place. It was a strange mix of pity and a deep, weary sadness. "Because leaving you to die out here would make us no better than you," she said simply. "Now, let's get your people patched up." The humans worked with a terrifying efficiency. They set up portable life support fields, used medicines that sealed wounds faster than anything Zethor had ever seen, and patched the gaping holes in his ship's hull. There was no gloating, no taunting. They just worked, like janitors cleaning up a mess. 2 hours later, Zethor was being escorted through the corridors of the human flagship, the TCS Indomitable. The vessel was so advanced it made his own top-of-the-line warship feel like a museum piece. Every deck was spotless, and the ship's systems hummed with a quiet, overwhelming power. Stranger still, the human crew members barely gave him a second glance as they passed by, as if having the enemy commander on their bridge was the most normal thing in the world. He was shown into a briefing room where a Captain Park was waiting. She was sitting at a massive table with a glowing holographic map floating above it, and she simply gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit," she offered. "Can I get you some water? Our intel says your species can drink it." Zethor just sank into the chair, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. Someone handed him a bulb of water. He took a nervous sip, half expecting it to be poison, but it was just clean, cold water. "You have an intelligence file on my people," he stated, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. "How long have you been watching us?" "About 3 years," Captain Park replied, her tone completely neutral. "We flagged your empire as a potential threat shortly after we established a presence in this sector. We've studied your military strategies, your technology, your culture. We even learned your language. We know your entire history." A cold dread trickled down Zethor's spine. "So, you knew we were going to attack?" "We did," she said, without a trace of emotion. "The Crack Empire has never met a species it perceived as weaker without attempting to conquer it. You're remarkably predictable in that respect." The words felt like a slap, mostly because he knew they were absolutely true. Zethor had been raised on the belief that the Crack were the galaxy's superior species, that their manifest destiny was to conquer and rule. But sitting here on this alien warship, saved by the very people he'd tried to exterminate, he was beginning to realize how pathetic that worldview really was. Captain Park tapped the holographic map, and new images appeared. Zethor recognized the planet immediately. "Earth," she said. "Our home. Let me tell you a little about us. Our world is a hard place. It has higher gravity than most life-sustaining planets, the weather is brutally violent, and it's crawling with predators that would give your elite soldiers nightmares. For humanity, evolution was just one long war for survival. We weren't the strongest creatures on our own planet, not by a long shot. We had to get smart just to keep from being eaten." The hologram shifted, showing scenes from humanity's own violent past, brutal wars, terrifying weapons, and entire cities being wiped off the map. "We spent 5,000 years fighting each other," Captain Park continued. "We'd build these amazing civilizations just to tear them down again. We became masters of death, nerve gas, designer plagues, atomic weapons. On 3 separate occasions, we came within a week of driving ourselves into total extinction." Zethor watched in stunned silence as the holographic cities vanished in blinding flashes of light. He saw those awful mushroom clouds rise and knew that millions had died in the blink of an eye. "But nearly killing ourselves taught us a very important lesson," Captain Park said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It taught us that strength, on its own, means nothing. A victory without wisdom is just a slower way to lose. We almost died because we were too strong for our own good. The images changed again, now showing the evolution of human starships. He saw clunky, primitive rockets give way to more advanced designs, and finally, the fusion-powered ships his scouts had reported. But then, new ships appeared, vessels so advanced they looked like they had been built by gods. When we finally figured out faster-than-light travel, we spent a full decade just debating whether we should even say hello to the rest of the galaxy, she said. Instead, we sent out probes, silent watchers. We learned about everyone out here, the peaceful traders, the territorial clans, and the expansionist empires, like yours. A horrifying thought began to bloom in Zethor's mind. You were afraid. We were cautious, she corrected him gently. There's a difference. We built our entire military to handle the absolute worst-case scenario. We kept asking one question: what if we meet someone whose technology is centuries ahead of ours? What if we find an enemy so powerful that fighting is pointless? How do we survive that? She gestured at the ship around them. This is the answer. We decided to develop overwhelming, undeniable power, but to chain it to absolute self-control. Every human warship is designed to fight a theoretical enemy we hope we never meet. Our weapons can crack a planet like an egg. Our shields can withstand the blast of a supernova. Our ships can move faster and jump farther than anything else in this galaxy. A cold, sickening dread washed over Zethor. All this time, the Crack had been storming through the galaxy, thinking they were titans. They thought their conquests were proof of their greatness. The truth was, they had just been lucky. They'd been lucky enough to never poke the sleeping giant, and even luckier that this giant chose peace when it could have had absolute power. So why reveal yourselves now? He finally managed to ask. Why not just stay hidden? Because hiding isn't the same as living, Captain Park answered, and because we've seen what your empire does to people who can't fight back. The Velians, the Taurans, species you wiped out before they ever stood a chance. We considered stepping in, but we decided it wasn't our place to police the galaxy. Her eyes narrowed, locking onto his. Then you attacked New Edinburgh, a civilian colony full of families. You gave them a 1-hour warning to surrender their entire world, and then you started blowing up their orbital stations for no reason. You left us no choice. We thought you were weak, Zethor confessed, the words tasting like ash. We know, she said. That was the point, but being weak is not an invitation to be conquered. And being vulnerable is not an excuse for violence. My people learned those lessons at a cost you can't possibly imagine. And now, it seems, it's our turn to teach. Captain Park stood and walked to the massive viewport. Outside, the broken pieces of the Crack invasion fleet drifted silently in the void. I'm going to tell you something that isn't classified, she said. The TCS Indomitable is 5 years old. In that time, we've charted 20 different star systems. We've made first contact with 4 other species that could have been hostile. None of them were, because a simple demonstration of what we're capable of was enough to convince them that a war would be a terrible idea. Today was the first time in 5 years that I've had to fire my main cannon at another living being. She turned back to face him, her expression like granite. Do you understand what that means? Humanity built the most powerful military in this entire quadrant of the galaxy with the primary goal of never, ever using it. We win by making it perfectly clear that picking a fight with us is suicide. That is what true strength looks like. Zethor's mind flashed through his own long career. 47 star systems conquered, hundreds of battles won, countless lives snuffed out. He had always thought of himself as a great warrior, but he had only ever picked fights he knew he could win. So, what happens to us now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Captain Park returned to her command chair. Now, you go home, she said calmly. You tell your emperor everything you saw here. You make him understand that humanity is not weak, we are not primitive, and we are not the easy victims you hoped for. She told me, you tell them we offer peace and friendship to anyone who comes to us with respect. But if they refuse to listen, and right then, her face turned to solid ice, if they send another fleet, we will tear it to pieces, and the one after that. Eventually, your Krothic Empire will learn that attacking humanity is a death sentence. The only question is how many of your own people you're willing to sacrifice before you finally get it. It was a long 3 months before I stood before the High Council of the Krothic Empire. 3 months of limping home in shattered warships, of silent, haunting journeys through the void, and of sleepless nights spent replaying the battle in my head. 3 months of pure, gut-wrenching terror, because I knew I had to deliver a message that would break the very foundation of my entire civilization. What would you do if you were on trial for your life, not for making a mistake, but for telling the truth? That was my reality. I was standing all alone in a massive cavern carved from the bedrock of my world, facing 12 of our empire's most powerful commanders. They glared down at me from their colossal thrones, their faces practically dripping with contempt. The eldest finally spoke, his voice rumbling like an earthquake. "Commander Zethor," he started, "you led a fleet of 200 of our finest ships against a primitive human colony. You returned with 137 crippled vessels, and 63 are just gone. Over 4,000 of our bravest warriors are dead. Now, tell us why we shouldn't have you executed for this catastrophe." I had practiced my speech 1,000 times, but standing there, I knew my life hinged on them believing a truth so insane it sounded like a complete fantasy. "Honored Council," I began, my voice holding steady even though my stomach was doing flips. "Our intelligence on the humans wasn't just flawed. It was a catastrophic lie. They aren't primitive. They aren't weak. In fact, they are, without question, the most advanced species we have ever encountered." The chamber was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, until one of the younger commanders let out a bitter laugh. "Advanced? They barely figured out faster than light travel." "No," I shot back, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "They allowed us to believe that. The truth is, humanity has had this technology for centuries. They've been watching us, studying our tactics, our ships, our every single weakness. When we attacked their colony, we weren't the hunters, we were the prey, walking right into a trap they had set just for us. I gave the signal for the holographic display to activate. The air in the center of the room shimmered, replaying the battle. You could see our entire armada just unloading everything we had on a single human ship, the Indomitable. Our most powerful cannons hit their shields and just fizzled out like sparks on solid rock. Then, the hologram showed their counterattack, a single perfect beam of light that sliced my own flagship clean in half. "One human vessel," I said, keeping my voice level, "and it wasn't even one of their frontline battleships. It wiped out our fleet and didn't suffer so much as a scratch on its paint. Their shields are impenetrable. Their hulls are made of alloys we don't even have names for. Their weapons unleash 10 times more energy than our scientists thought was physically possible." Another commander jumped to his feet. "Then why are you still alive? If they're so powerful, why did they let you come back?" "That," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "is the most important part of my report. They let us go because they needed a messenger. They sent me back to tell you exactly what I saw." I looked each council member directly in the eye. Humanity does not want a war. They could have turned our entire fleet into cosmic dust. Instead, they surgically disabled our ships, rescued every single survivor, treated our wounded, and then sent us home. The human captain, a woman named Park, told me herself, their greatest weapon is the one they never have to use. They win by making it painfully obvious that starting a fight with them is just another way of committing suicide. The eldest commander leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowed to slits. "Are you telling us we've met a power greater than our own, a power that chooses peace over conquest?" "Yes, honored elder, and I'm telling you that we have to learn from them. The Krothic Empire has always lived by one principle: the strong take what they want. But humanity is showing us a different path. They are stronger than us in every possible way, and yet they have absolutely no desire to rule us." "That's weakness," one of the commanders shouted. "They're cowards, too afraid to wield the power they have." "No," I countered, surprised by my own certainty. "It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Captain Park told me that humanity almost annihilated itself 3 separate times with its own creations. They learned the hardest lesson there is. Power without control is just a fancy way to self-destruct. They built their military to be impossibly powerful for one reason and one reason only, so they would never, ever have to actually use it. For 300 years, my people, the Krothak, believed we were the toughest species in the galaxy. Our whole society was built on the idea that might makes right, so when we set out to crush the humans, I thought it would be business as usual. But what if everything you were taught about strength was dead wrong? What if real power wasn't about dominating others, but about something else entirely? As I was being pulled from the wreckage of my own ship by the very people I was there to destroy, it all became clear. And now, standing before my own leaders, I had to tell them that our entire way of life was a dangerous lie. The silence in the chamber was so thick you could feel it. You could almost hear their minds resisting a truth they desperately didn't want to face. At last, the eldest commander spoke up. "So what do you propose, Commander? That we just bow down and surrender?" "No," I answered calmly. "I propose we go and talk to them. The humans are offering a peaceful alliance to anyone who approaches them as an equal," I clarified. "They possess technology we can't even fathom, knowledge that could save our empire from becoming a fossil. They want to help us become better." Another councilman scoffed. "Or we could build a bigger fleet, avenge this humiliation." A shiver ran down my spine. "That fleet will be destroyed too," I said, my voice completely flat. Captain Park made that crystal clear. They will defend themselves, and they have 400 ships just like the one we fought, and that's not even counting their larger, more terrifying classes. If we send 1,000 of our best warships, they will take every single one of them apart like a child breaking a toy. And they won't even consider it a real fight, because they are that far beyond us. "You almost sound like you admire them," a council member accused, his voice dripping with venom. "I do," I admitted, without a moment's hesitation. "They are everything we claim to be, brilliant, powerful, and unbeatable. The only difference is they temper that power with wisdom. They could rule the entire galaxy by force if they wanted to. Instead, they're asking for friends." The debate raged for hours. I stood my ground. I answered every challenge, showed them the flight recorder data from my ship, and hammered home the one core truth again and again. This was not an enemy we could ever defeat. Finally, the eldest council member stood. "The council has made its decision. We will send diplomats to the humans. We will request peace." "But you need to understand this, Commander Zethor," he growled, his voice like grinding stone. "You have asked us to bet the entire future of our civilization on your story. If you are wrong about these humans, if this is all some elaborate trick, your life is forfeit." "I understand," I replied, "but I'm not wrong. I saw what they can do, and I am alive because of their mercy. The choice is simple. We can either evolve and join the galactic community, or we can become a footnote in a history book about arrogant empires that refuse to see the future." 2 months later, our diplomatic ships carefully entered orbit around the planet Earth. There were no battle stations, only polite and professional greetings. Negotiations began for peace and a technology exchange treaty. I was there, no longer a commander, but an advisor, staring down at that beautiful blue and white world from an observation deck. It was a stunningly beautiful planet, and I could see how a world of such intense and sometimes harsh beauty could create such a resilient species. A human diplomat, Ambassador Martinez, came and stood beside me. "Commander Zethor," she said, using my former title as a sign of respect, "I wanted to personally thank you. Captain Park told us what you did. You chose wisdom when most in your position would have chosen pride." I managed a small, tired smile. It's an easy choice to make when your pride is moments away from getting you and everyone you care about turned into atoms. "That's a fair point," she laughed, "but you'd be surprised how many would still pick pride. We've read our own history books. Every single empire that was built on conquest eventually collapsed. They either rot from the inside out or they finally pick a fight with someone stronger," she went on. We just decided we wanted to be the ones to finally break that vicious cycle. It took me a moment to really understand. So you built a power so overwhelming, I said, the scale of it finally hitting me, that you would never be tempted to use it for conquest. Exactly. It's much easier to keep the peace when every other species in the galaxy knows that a war with you would be their complete annihilation, and for us, a total waste of our time. We call it peace through strength, but it's a strength that is always guided by wisdom. Strength alone just starts a bigger arms race that ultimately nobody wins. I thought about our own empire, the 47 systems we controlled with an iron fist, all the races we ruled through fear. I thought about how much energy we wasted just holding on to what we had. I said, my voice full of a new understanding, the Krothek have a great deal to learn from you, and none of it has to do with building better starships. For generations, we'd been laser-focused on one thing, taking over everything, I confessed. It never even occurred to us to ask what the point was. Ambassador Martinez gave me a kind smile. Realizing you've been walking the wrong road is the first step toward finding a better one. Who knows? A few hundred years from now, the Krothek Empire might not be remembered for the star systems it conquered, but for the new worlds it helped build. I let out a breath. Maybe. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a little spark of hope ignited inside me. Through the window, human vessels, the very same design that had shattered my fleet, floated past like silent partners. They were the guardians of a peace that was so absolute because it was backed by power we couldn't even comprehend. I can still feel that ice-cold dread from 3 months ago, watching my own flagship get torn apart. I used to look at that human ship and see a nightmare. Now I realized I was looking at our only hope. In a single, terrifying flash, I saw our entire destiny laid out. It wasn't a galaxy ruled by the faction with the biggest guns, but one where true strength was used as a shield to protect everyone, not just a club for conquest. The second that lone human ship blinked into existence, every Krothek knew with chilling certainty that our ancient warrior code was nothing more than a fast track to oblivion. But behind that incredible power, we found something completely unexpected, a chance to be better, an invitation to join a galactic family built on partnership, not fear. It's not going to be an easy ride. Old habits are hard to break. We've still got warmongers back on the homeworld screaming for one last fight, one final charge to prove we're still strong. But their voices get quieter every day, silenced by the simple, undeniable truth of who humanity really is. I pressed my hand against the cold viewport, gazing down at the planet Earth. What a savage world to have been born from, I thought. It had obviously forged a people who were just as resilient, and yet somehow that constant struggle to survive had taught them empathy. Their countless wars against themselves had shown them the true power of working together. After looking their own extinction right in the eye, they figured out that real strength isn't about crushing your enemies, but having the wisdom to let them live. We saw their main battleship, I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. And in that moment, we understood. The war was lost before a single shot was fired. We were completely outmatched. They just decided not to erase us from existence. And that one simple act of mercy, it changed the entire galaxy forever.